I thought it'd be fun to talk a little bit about some unique cases that I worked with as a psychologist. And in particular, I thought it would be fun to talk about referral sources. When I first began a private practice in psychology in 1979, the vast majority of my referrals came from other professionals, in particular physicians, primary care physicians, general practitioners. I received lots of referrals from pediatricians because I especially worked with children and adolescents, which many psychologists don't. I received referrals from psychiatrists who wanted comprehensive psychological assessments done on their patients. I received referrals from pastors, ministers, people like that who had been counseling individuals and felt like their needs were beyond their expertise and training. Some of my best referrals came from current and former clients who would say to friends who were having issues, Dr. Grandgard really helped me, and I think he could help you. Those are some of your best referrals, coming from people you've already assisted in some way. But there's a group of people that I wanted to focus on today that were what I called referred by God. And I say that because they picked me out of the telephone book. How many of you are old enough to remember telephone books? These were things that were given to everyone once a year. A new issue would come out, and in the Austin one was about that thick. Some big cities had two separate books, one for what they call the white pages, which had everyone who had a telephone's name, address, and phone number in it. And then the other book was the yellow pages, which had businesses listed. And back in those days, it was considered unethical for a professional to advertise in the yellow pages or something like that. So, physicians, dentists, psychologists, people like that, all you were allowed to have in the yellow pages was under the heading of what your profession is, was your name, your office address, and your office phone number. And then some people had a secondary number to call for emergencies because professionals tend to be on call 24/7. And so, other occupations, if you needed a plumber or something like that, or an electrician, they would have a nice big box ad in the yellow pages telling you all what they could do and so on. Restaurants and furniture stores and, department stores, they would have good size ads in the yellow pages. Sometimes a whole page ad, but professionals were only allowed to have their business name, business address, and business phone. So it was always kind of, think about it. If you had a problem that was really bothering you, who would you call? Well, obviously, if you needed someone to mow your lawn, you would look in the yellow pages under lawn service. But if you had psychological problems Would you really just pick somebody out of the telephone book? Nobody did that. Well, a few people did. And that's why I say they were referred by God. And so let me tell you some about a couple of cases. I often thought about writing an entire book called Referred by God, and it would highlight the people who had just picked me out of the yellow pages. And the first one was this woman who called me at my office, and she asked me if I administered the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, better known as the MMPI. By the way, this was around 1985, probably, that she called. The revised version of the MMPI didn't come out until about 1989, so this was the original MMPI. It had 566 true-false questions. Everything from, I would like to do the work of a florist, true or false, to sometimes I see and hear things around me that other people don't. Or there's something wrong with my mind, true or false. Or someone is trying to control my mind, true or false. And the MMPI was designed to be a screening test for psychological disorders. It had some scales built in it to screen out people who were trying to fake good or fake bad. And so somebody who wanted to come across as having severe psychological problems, well, they wouldn't admit to all of those weird items. But they would probably have a pattern of those unusual items. Someone ordered to take the MMPI would tend to answer questions that almost anybody wouldn't answer a certain direction in that direction because they wanted to appear problem-free. For example, a question like, I read the editorial page of the newspaper every day. True or false? Well, almost no one reads the editorial page of the newspaper every day. You might look at the headline and see what it says, and you might, if it interests you, you might read it. But nobody other than journalists and political activists read the editorial page of the newspaper. So just because you say true to a question like that doesn't mean you're lying, but who are you kidding? You're trying to make yourself look perfect, and people aren't perfect. So anyway, she wanted to take this test, and I said that I could give it to her. She said that she had had the MMPI, maybe 10 years previously, and didn't do very well on it, and it was suggested to her that she might have some serious type of mental disorder, like schizophrenia or something like that. So she made an appointment and she came in to take the test. And I remember the day she came in, my administrative assistant came and got me, and she said, that lady's here to take the test. And I said, okay, great. Just put her in the testing room. And this is a test you take on your own. You just simply fill in bubbles, true and false. And then when she's finished, I will score it on the computer. Basically, in those days, I was one of the first psychologists I knew to have a personal computer. I always like to say I was doing things on the internet before the internet existed. I was able to, I had a modem connected to my computer, and I would take tests that clients had completed, and I would key in all their answers on my computer, and then I would send their responses over the telephone lines to a computer in Minnesota, which then analyzed it and sent me back a comprehensive report, which I then printed out and went over with the client. And any unusual items, I would do a clinical interview regarding, like you said, sometimes your soul feels like your soul leaves your body. What do you mean by that? Well, for one person, maybe they had an out-of-body near-death experience. For another person, they might say, oh, I just feel spiritually dead. I never go to church anymore. I don't pray. So, you'd want to follow up on a question like that and see just what they meant by it. So anyway, this lady came in and took the tests and made an appointment to come back a day or two later for a test interpretation and a clinical interview. And she was an older woman in her 80s. And when she came back in, I said to her, well, who referred you? Actually, she had filled out a form. Whenever a new client came in, there was a form to fill out, with their name and address and information like that. And I said to her, you were put on here that you picked me out of the phone book. Why me? Why not someone else? And her response was, well, I looked in the phone book and I ride the bus everywhere, and your office is right on the bus route to my house. And the bus stops right out in front of your complex. So I thought, this is great. At the time, I was officing at Medical Science Center over on 38th Street, there between Lamar and Guadalupe. I said, oh, okay. So anyway, I went over the results with her, and I told her, your profile is perfectly normal. You don't have elevations on any of the scales. Again, the purpose of the MMPI is to screen for psychological disorders. When I was director of testing for the Minirth-Meyer Tunnel and Wilson Clinic, and we had our own 20-bed inpatient unit over at Shoal Creek Hospital. Every patient coming in, I would give an MMPI to. So I had given hundreds of MMPIs over the years, maybe as many as 1,000. I had become quite good at interpreting the results. I told her, your profile is perfectly normal. You don't have any elevations on anything. What else can I say? She said, well, I was concerned because, 10 or 15 years previously to this, somebody told her that she had severe problems. And she said, are you sure there's nothing in there? And I would say to you that her scores on the lie scale and the fake good scale and the fake bad scale were all in the normal range. So, she didn't try to undo whatever this previous exam had shown. I wish I had had the previous profile to take a look at. I told her, the only score you have that's, it's up there, but it's not in the clinically significant area, but it's one of your higher scores, is on anxiety. But it's still in the normal range. You know, we all get anxious. There's things that bother all of us. What are you, is there something you're anxious about that maybe you'd like to talk about? Oh, I don't know. No, not really, the lady said. She was up in the years and dressed rather shabbily. In fact, my administrative assistant was concerned that maybe she couldn't afford my services, and I told her, you know, don't worry about it. If it turns out this lady doesn't have any money, we'll just write it off as a business expense. You know, I need to help her however I can. And I thought, you know, she's older, and I looked at her and I said, are you afraid of dying? And, you know, she took a deep breath and she said, yes, I am. That's exactly what my anxiety is about. I said to her, do you believe in life after death? She said, I don't know what I believe. She said to me, what do you believe? Referred by God. Here's my chance to share what I think. She asked me, I said, you really want to know? She said, yes, I do, very much. I said, well, I do believe in life after death. I told her, in fact, I am not afraid of death because I believe in life after death. I've lost any number of loved ones personally over the years, including my own father, who died when I was 6 years old. And my whole life I've looked forward to someday again seeing him. I do believe in life after death. And I do believe that there is a heaven, and it's a kind of a place where you can be reunited with loved ones and people like that, and live forever in God's presence. She said, I'd like to believe that too. And she said, what would I have to do to make sure that I end up in heaven after I die? You know, basically I shared the gospel with her. I shared verses from the Bible like John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whosoever believe in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. She said, that's what I want to believe. What do I have to do? And I said, simply say a prayer to God. Say, thank you for sending your son to die for me on the cross, as that he took all of my sins and the sins of the world upon himself, and thank you, pray to Jesus, thank you for dying in my place. I accept your gift. thank you for forgiving me of all of my sins. I want to be with you forever. And she said, I'm going to do that. As soon as I get home from here, I'm going to pray for forgiveness and accept Christ as my Savior. I said to her, that's wonderful. You don't have to wait till you get home. I mean, you can if you want. You could pray it while you're riding on the bus, but you can do it right here. You don't have to wait. But if you're going to want to wait till you get home, that's great. She said, could I really do it right here in your office? I said, it wouldn't bother me. I will rejoice. And right there in my office, she prayed for forgiveness of her sins, and that thank God for sending Christ to die in her place. And, when it was over, she looked at me and she said, I feel different. I don't feel afraid at all about dying. This is fantastic. I said, well, now you have to take the next step. Something that I always emphasize to clients is being ready to take the next step. If you look at various passages in the Bible, Jesus always challenged people to take the next step. A lot of people coming in for psychological help don't really want to get better. I mean, they do and they don't. It's what we call an approach avoidance conflict. There's different types of conflict. There's approach, avoidance, and approach avoidance. Approach conflict would be where you have to choose between two or more equally appealing things. A good example is going out to eat at your favorite restaurant. Should I order this or should I order this? Well, it kind of doesn't matter. Order the one thing and next time you go order the other thing. An avoidance conflict is where you have to choose between two or more unappealing things. I always like to say elections are like an avoidance conflict. I don't want to vote for this person and I don't want to vote for this person. They're both bad news. Well, which is the lesser of two evils? And you vote for that person. Isn't that a shame? But I think that's the way most elections seem to turn out. With the approach avoidance conflicts, there was where you want to, but you don't want to at the same time. You want to do it, but you don't. And in the case of many psychological situations, it's like you want to get better, but you don't. I think of a number of cases where Jesus healed someone. One time he healed a blind man, someone who had been born blind. Jesus spit in the mud and took the mud and put it on his eyes and said, go wash your eyes in the pool of Siloam. And when the guy did, all of a sudden he could see. There was a paralytic that he approached one time who was seated by a well, and Jesus said to him, do you want to be healed? Now, what a dumb question to ask somebody who's blind or who can't walk. Do you want to be healed? Of course they want to be healed. But it's an approach avoidance conflict, because once they're healed, they can't beg for money anymore. Now they got to get a job. And, you know, nowhere in the Bible does it say that Jesus healed somebody's vision or healed their legs so they could walk, and also gave them, a high school diploma and a job, and so once you're healed, you've got a whole new set of problems. And I've always taken that approach to counseling people, because I often have said to people when they come in, do you want to be healed? That suppose I have I am the most talented psychologist there ever was, and you came in with all your problems, and I had these special powers, and I could go abracadabra. Your problems are all gone. They're solved. Now, what's the next step? What do you have to do now? Solving your problems means that you have to take the next step. And so many clients, they're not ready to take the next step, and so they don't really want to be healed yet. They don't want to be healed. I said to this lady, well, the next step now is you need to find a group of fellow believers in Christ to study the Bible with and to worship with. You need to find a church home. And she said, what about your church? Could I come to your church? And I said, well, I'm sure the people at my church would welcome you with open arms. It's not on the bus route, and it's in a completely different part of town. But there are people, I'm sure, I can arrange for somebody to come and pick you up. And she said, I would like that. And so I said, okay, I'll find somebody who can come and get you. And she called me up a day or two later and said, no one will need to come and get me, because I talked to my daughter on the phone, and when I told her I had become a Christian, she was so happy and so elated, because she had been praying for me for years. And she invited me to go to church with her. I said, wonderful. Wonderful. That's fantastic. And so my client, who I never saw again, who was referred by God, started going to church with her daughter, who had been praying for years for her to come with her. Back to what I was saying about needing to be ready to take the next step. There are people that, although they come in for help, they're not ready to take the next step for whatever reason. And sometimes you don't ever see them again. They may come to you for a session or 2 sessions or 3 sessions, and you never see them again. And the reason is because they're not ready to take the next step. Because taking the next step might mean having to change. And that will create a completely different life, and they may not feel prepared for that life. And so, until they're ready to take that next step, they aren't really ready to be healed. That's the end of this little excerpt. I will make another video telling you about another client who was referred by God.